Christian warlord with the Lord's Resistance Army, Joseph Kony. So it doesn't matter because the public's not really paying attention. It's just, hey, here's a new guy. He's worse than Hitler. We're going to invade. And you can always tell it's telltale because they love a boogeyman nobody's seen for years. That's a big telltale. Because somebody who isn't really dead or isn't in some secret prison, they're going to speak out. They're not going to play along. So the telltale sign of a bin Laden or a Kony is they're already dead. And so, but you use a boogeyman who's dead because then they can't argue. And that's why Ugandans all over the country, I mean, it's all over the news, are going, well, none of this is even true. Nobody's seen this guy in almost 6 years, and he was a very small force at the time, and whatever's left of his group is on a couple hundred square miles in the north and isn't even a factor. Well, what is this? Our problem is the government's taking our property. But that's the cover. Why are U.S. troops going to be there? Why is increased funding going to take place? Because they're going to move people off their land at gunpoint. And that's admitted. And that's why I get angry at Angelina Jolie and George Clooney. Now, you've seen all this rollout, all this PR. What's the government going to do? Making it look like it's the people. And I'm not saying what's happening in Sudan is good. You've got the Muslims killing Christians for a very, very long time. You've got the West quietly involved financing both sides. I don't like what the Muslim groups are doing there to Christians. This isn't even for me a Muslim-Christian issue. It's just that that's just like they use Muslims as the pretext to go after the Serbs. Not saying the Serbs were blameless or guiltless. The point is that if you look at the numbers, the Croats and the Muslims, roughly, and the UN admits this, killed double what the Serbs did in all those conflicts in the Balkans. So why did the UN side with the Muslims in that case? Because they were going after the most powerful group in the area, the Serbs, to break them up and weaken them. The globalists admit their strategy is microstates. The globalists admit that it's a strategy of tension and of intersectarian fighting. And so now you see George Clooney, he goes to the White House. He says, I think Obama's going to do something about Sudan right as all this is being launched, right as we're hearing, oh, AFRICOM's going in after the bases are built and set up. This is the new beachhead, going into Uganda, going into Sudan, going in to Tanzania, going into Kenya, they're talking about. Kenya. And again, the West will destabilize it through proxies and then come in. Now he's been arrested at the Sudanese embassy, storming the embassy. He tried to walk in and talk to him. Notice they arrested him because they wanted publicity. They didn't arrest me twice when I stormed the Texas Capitol over the TSA because they knew it was a unifying issue that everybody's angry about. And the police were told to just stand down as I marched there with hundreds of people screaming at them, screaming at the politicians. I went in the governor's office and screamed at them, but they'd all been told to stand down. Don't give Jones attention on a real issue. But on the Clooney thing, oh my gosh, poor guy got arrested. He's this hero. Clooney is smart. He knows full well he's a globalist operative. He's about as liberal as Richard Nixon. I mean, it's just a total actor front.
Hi, I'm Mark.
I'm going to come back in the next segment and hit some other important news. And then we'll go to your phone calls on any subject you'd like to raise here today. I would love to hear from you. The toll-free number to join us on this Friday edition is 800-259-9231, 800-259-9231. And coming up, Greece on the breadline. HIV and malaria make a comeback. Malaria in the Mediterranean. People are starving to death. People are dumping their kids out on the street. Austerity is meant to shut down your economy. Most of the debt was not their debt. It was the debt of the big mega banks that took control of their country. And you want to see our future? It's Greece. The national parks going to private bankers, not even to Goldman Sachs. This is the future. I'm going to be breaking that down. This is what they want to do here, and this is what they'll get away with if we let them. Now, just briefly finishing up with this whole new PR rollout. You've heard of WMDs in Iraq. You've heard of babies thrown out of incubators. You've heard of Gaddafi rape gangs and people fueled by Viagra. All lies. But you find out it's a lie after the war is launched. That's why when you're talking to known liars, you're an idiot. If after someone's lied to you hundreds of times and been caught, then you still trust them. I think people just feel powerless, so they just decide to be comfortable with the fact that you're being lied to. But George Clooney arrested at Sudanese embassy. So he goes over to Obama's White House office and says, I want you to do something about the problems in Sudan. And the answer is, well, we'll just send in the United Nations to arrest the leader there. And what does Kony say? Kony says the same thing. They say, look, this is about awareness of all of Africa. We want to help people everywhere. And there's Clooney with the Kony connection. He's the good humanitarian. He's the good actor. He's the one that cares about you. He supports taking your guns. He supports taking your property, Agenda 21. He supports open borders. He supports globalism. He's a good guy. The corporate whore media told you so. And he's nothing but a manufactured globalist. He's nothing but an empty suit who thinks you're all a big joke. And let me tell you, somebody like Clooney who is smart, he knows full well the stunts he's pulling. He knows full well what he's doing. And it's sick. They get off on this idea of being these selfless, caring, good people. And Angelina Jolie. Now, I'm not calling for George Clooney's arrest because he's not officially an envoy of the UN. He doesn't officially go stand at the dock when they're, convicting somebody in a kangaroo court, calling them the bad man, but the UN doing, 100-to-1 murder is the good guy. She's an actual agent of this, going to Tunisia for months, agitating for war with Libya and destroying their infrastructure. She goes and agitates for an invasion of Syria. She goes and agitates for a war against Iran. She goes and agitates for an invasion of Uganda to back up the government, sweeping the people. She is an agent of this. Clooney's got his free speech. And, let's, let a humanitarian mission come into Sudan. You saw the humanitarian mission of Libya, right? They said, well, bombing is kinetic action. It's not war. And, yeah, we're bombing apartment buildings and all of this. But you know what? Gaddafi might have roughed up some protesters. You mean protesters with bazookas and rocket launchers, RPGs, and aircraft and tanks? You mean those guys that were lining people up on the highway if they weren't part of the Al-Qaeda Wahhabi groups and shooting them and on video, hacking families up with machetes? You mean those guys? This was already going on in the east of Libya while Jolie was running around praising these people, saying it was wonderful. Again, the West goes in, funds a uprising, calls it peaceful, and then bombs the country. Now, I've got to say, humanitarian intervention in Sudan is a lot more reasonable than it would be in Libya or Uganda, where Uganda, our government in the West, is backing the dictator who's killed millions of people in 26 years, on record. There, it's purely naked aggression and excuse to grab oil and other minerals. In the case of Sudan, the Muslims are the aggressors. They are pushing the Christians back. There is genocide. But you better believe that if the U.S. goes in there, it's for the resources, and the people are going to end up even being worse off. In fact, from what I've seen in the past, the West will go in, take over, and then put in a new Muslim leader, like Odinga in Kenya, and they'll start killing Christians at 100 times the rate. That's my point. You can't get good out of this New World Order. They've always got an excuse of why they're doing something, but it never ends up.
We're up.
All right, we've got a congressman scheduled to be popping in with us on some really important news coming up at the bottom of the next hour. We have Sanyu, girl from Uganda, who's been countering the globalist pro-invasion propaganda and reaching millions and millions of people. She's going to be popping in, and Patrick Henningsen as well in studio. Now, that said, I do want to go to your phone calls, and I'm not going to spend any more time, unless you bring it up in your calls, until we get into the third hour on this Kony 2012 thing. But again, that was just the cap in the back of the cartridge, igniting the powder in the cartridge, pushing the projectile, the bullet, down the barrel. And before this projectile leaves the barrel, I just want people to understand exactly what's happening. This is target Africa for globalist invasion. And so many people over the years have on the street and an email have commented to me, hey, Alex, you know what? You like your standard of living? Well, then you better be for all these invasions, because that's what keeps your standard of living up. And I've made an economic study of that, and that's not really true. The United States became wealthy because of its inventiveness and because of its wealth, and had over 10% growth rates for the first 100+ years of its expansion. And some of that was exploitive, but the Indians, the natives, were killing each other. They would come and say, help me go knock out the other tribe. Humans are humans. They were acting the exact same way. It was just that the Europeans had more advanced technologies. And you'd have the French teamed up with one tribe or tribes, and the British teamed up with another group, and the Spanish teamed up with another. It was an all-out fight, and the Indians totally got it, because they weren't all just living in peace. They were constantly fighting over who had control of what area. They just didn't put it down in deeds on paper. They would... So a lot of this has been romanticized, when in reality it was something else. My point is, we pay for the empire, and we lose a lot more supporting the empire than we actually gain from it. And that idea that we're getting ahead because of the New World Order, this entire New World Order system is going after our freedoms as well. The globalists see all humans the same. To be exploited, to be dumbed down, to be controlled, to be killed if they can get away with it, if you don't have anything that offers something up to them. It's all about raw, pure power, and the globalists see that as the greatest attribute, that they are ruthless, and they see those of us that aren't as weak. All right, so let me go through a smattering of other important news that ties into this. Look at this report. Greece on the breadline, HIV and malaria make a comeback, and this is from the London Guardian. The savage cuts to Greece's health services budget, well, once you get socialist health care, all you got's the government, have led to sharp rise in HIV, AIDS, and malaria in the beleaguered nation, said a leading aid organization yesterday. The incidence of AIDS among intravenous drug users in central Athens soared by 1,250% in the first 10 months of 2011 compared with the same period the previous year, according to the head, and it goes through the group. Also, they report that malaria is becoming epidemic in the South for the first time since the rule of the colonels, which ended in the 1970s. And it just goes on. Folks, they are being forced to dump their children on the street, and government orphanages are running out of food. There are power outages now, and you're like, wow, that's terrible. Well, the globalists want to have their society fall apart, because then confidence dries up, tourism dries up, things will completely fall apart, and in the next 5 years or so, the globalists can go in and buy up everything for pennies on the dollar, and then they'll have certain economic zones that they turn back on, but only those zones. Everything else will be in squalor in a high-security type system. And that's why you're going into the checkpoint society, because the elites want to be safe within their system. And they want to make you poor as a tool of control, but also really corrupt elites have written about this. They enjoy, it's called feudalism. It's a system of poverty for control, seeing you poor. That makes their caviar and mistresses